Well, hello there again, friends. Today is 2/2/2022, and today is Odin Vlog Project Day 52, and we're just going to jump right in. So, we're on Foundations, Project Etch-a-Sketch Part 1. I'm going to have this break it into at least two parts, if not more. We'll see how it goes, but we'll start right in. In this project, you'll be creating a pretty neat toy for your portfolio to flex your DOM skills. You're going to build a browser version of something between a sketchpad and an Etch-a-Sketch. The project should not be easy for you. You'll probably have to Google frequently to get the right JavaScript methods and CSS to use. In fact, that's the point. You can build this using the tools that you have already learned, and there are plenty of resources on the net for learning stuff we haven't covered yet if you decide you need it. We'll walk you through the basic steps, but it'll be up to you to actually implement them. If you get totally stuck, drop by the chat room. Someone will be there to point you in the right direction. So, first off, it starts you off by getting you set up with a repo, which I won't go over that. You guys, by this point, you should be a pro at that. We've done it like, what, 3 or 4 times probably? And so we're going to go down here, and today we're going to focus on this highlighted part. So we're going to create a web page with a 16 by 16 grid of square divs. We're going to create the divs using JavaScript. Don't try making them by hand with copy and pasting your HTML file. It's best, can't talk. It's best to put your grid squares inside another container div, which can go directly in your HTML. There are several different ways to make the divs appear as grid versus one on each line. Feel free to use any or play with each of them. And then there's float clear, inline block, flex block, and CSS grid. And then actually I need to highlight more. We're still in the same section here. There we go. Be careful with borders and margin as they adjust the size of the squares. And then they give some helpful hints in case you get stuck. Did you link your CSS? Open your browser DevTools. Check if there's any errors in JavaScript console. Check your elements pane to see if the elements have actually shown up but are somehow hidden. And go willy-nilly and add console.log statements to your JavaScript to see if it's actually being loaded. So, with that said, I took it one way and took screenshots and then decided to go a different way, and I'm going to show you now what I originally had. I took screenshots along the way. So originally, this didn't change at all actually. This is the boilerplate file, the HTML, the index.html file. And so I created a div called ID, and it's called, or created a div with an ID called container. And that's pretty much it. And I gave it a title of Etch-a-Sketch. Sorry if this is small. Let's make this a little bit larger. So I have an ID of container on the div, and I have a title called Etch-a-Sketch JS game. And then if you noticed here, I put the script at the bottom. I did a link first for relative style sheet href to the styles.css file. And then I want JavaScript to run last, very last, after everything's loaded. So HTML loads, it loads the style sheet, and then it loads the script.js, and I used the defer attribute, which will make sure that the script is ran last, and script tag. So that's that. Boy, that's real small. Simply put, this is at the time of the screenshot. This is all I had for the CSS. So pound container, which if you remember, pound is the ID attribute. So ID container display grid. I had tried flex, as we become pros with, and I couldn't figure out a way to get it to work on flex box, so I switched to grid, thinking maybe that would help. And then here's what I accompanied it with the JavaScript. So I created a constant variable called container div, and that takes on document.querySelector container, which we just went over, and I started a grid count equals 0 variable outside, and then I created a while loop. And the idea of this, and it did work actually. I'll show you in a second. I took a screenshot of the browser. This is just looping through to 32, which is 16 times 2. So it's looping through to create 32 grids, or 32 divs basically. So while the grid count is less than 32, so it starts out at 0, we have constant grid div equals document.createElementDiv. div. So we're going to create the element there. Next line, we're going to add the content hello, or content add, excuse me, grid divs classless add content. So basically I'm just giving it a attribute of content for a class, and you'll see that in my next screenshot. And then grid divs text content equals hello. I just wanted to put something in there so I could visibly see the divs in the DevTools pretty easily. And maybe I was thinking when I wrote this I could see it on the browser too. Kind of like a console.log type, more for troubleshooting. And I had a container.div append child, so that appends it. And then grid count gets incremented by 1. And I had a console.log sprinkled in there at the end to give me the grid count so I can make sure that the counter is working correctly. So that, if you execute that, it does run this here. And I'm sorry if it's small. Hopefully you're not watching on a phone right now because I can't really zoom in. I mean, I guess I can, but it's going to get kind of hard to see because there's a lot going on here. I'll zoom into the most important part. So what it did was it created hello, 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 just like I wanted to, but it went vertical. And here's all the class. So I have the class content hello. So it did exactly what I expected to do. And you see I have the counts.log logging every time it goes through that while loop down to 32. So I know that I had 32 successful divs created. So it did exactly what I wanted, but I got kind of stuck here. I couldn't figure out how. I knew I was going to be a struggle to get them to go 16 by 16, both horizontally and vertically. Excuse me. So I did some. At this point, I stopped and I just started doing some Googling instead of just endlessly spinning my wheels. So, and the first thing I came across was this right here. Coincidentally, I didn't want all this information, but actually ended up working. So I read through this, and it's making a function. Basically, it does essentially what I did, but they're not using a while loop. They're creating a function and using a for loop inside the function. So I like that I was on the right track. But boy, did I like this a whole lot better. It's cleaner. It's less code. I knew it was going to be less code because I knew what I had wasn't done yet. And then we'll get into this. This is the CSS. So basically, I took this and I refactored it with different variables and using it the way that I would code it. And so we'll go through that next. So I took it from Stack Overflow. And so here's the, did I get it through all I wanted to there? I think so, yeah. So basically I deleted that, well I commented it out and started all over after I found this. And so I didn't change anything here. This all stayed the same. And then on the style sheet, this is what I add. So I already had pound container, but I just had display grid and nothing else. So going from the top. So we have not gone over grid yet, at least not that I remember. If we did, it must have been a really small section of a module a long time ago because I don't remember it. So I'm going to try to explain grid the best I can. I'm going to fumble through some of it. So show me a little bit of grace there, and you can leave a comment if you want to, correct anything that I have wrong, basically. So in the CSS here, we have :root, and you see the selector specificity is 0, 1, 0. So what I equate this to is this is like God mode. Like this is always going to get run first. You think of root, you think of Linux, excuse me, where you're running command line root sudo, that sort of thing. So I would put this at you're trying to create CSS at the HTML level, it's at the very lowest level. And what it's doing is it's creating two definitions, a grid columns a 1 and a grid rows. And the best way to explain this, since we never really went over this, basically is that we want to start off every session, every basically iteration with a CSS grid and columns of 1 and 1, which means there's going to be one column and one row, which equals one box. So that'll be one box. And then we have container. So we have grid, that's self-explanatory. Grid gap, 1 EM, that's just the it says right, look at that right there. Property is obsolete, avoid using it. So this, obviously the Stack Overflow, now I just realized that I copied over and refactored. I didn't refactor this stuff, but it must have been wrote a long time ago because that says obsolete. So I'll probably take a look at that after this video. But basically grid gap is what it sounds like. It's basically the grid's version of gap like we had in Flexbox. 1 EM is just the I don't remember exactly what EM means. That's just basically one unit. It's a measurement size for the gap between. And you have grid template rows and grid template columns. This I don't know exactly what it does. It basically is repeating the function inside of it. So I thought var here in this instance was the same as let. So I won't do it now, but I'll explain it to you. I put let in there and it fails. So apparently var in this instance is either not variable or it is a variable but used in a very specific way. We've also not learned about var at all. We've just basically learned that basically don't use it. That it's old, obsolete, and that it does a few certain things that let doesn't do. So either that's the case for here or that var means completely something different and it may be like a method, or it might actually be maybe its own function. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you know. I do know though that this repeat here is going to repeat grid columns and grid rows, and 1FR is referencing the size. So basically it's going to do a repeat when it hits us of row and column for the container, and it's getting that information from up here, and it's going to basically repeat what's up here. So it's creating another. So this basically root gets you started, and then the container will look here every time it wants to create a div, if you will, in this example. So it's going to create that div with that gridded column, that column and row of 1. And then grid item, padding is 1 EM. Padding is just padding, border, and text align is that's pretty self-explanatory. We've been going over that forever. And grid item is mentioned in the JavaScript. So if you go over here, same thing. We have the container div equals document.query selector pound container. So we're selecting that as our query, creating the function of make rows, and instead of cols, I put columns in there. I like to be a little more verbose, so I brought in rows and columns as parameters. And you have two container div set properties that set the row and column, and then so this here is what calls the grid row and grid column. Well, actually, it doesn't really call it. It sets that attribute, that property, and I'll show you that in a minute because I didn't exactly know in the moment what set property, what this was actually doing. So you can see here I did console.log container div, console.log row, and console.log columns. As you know, these are sprinkled in for troubleshooting. They were not in the Stack Overflow. I added those so I could see what this exactly was doing. So we'll see that in a minute. And then there's a for loop inside here, and so they have C. I used I, so I equals 0, and I, as long as I is less than rows times columns, we're going to increment I by 1. And inside the for loop, we're creating a variable called square that is a new div, and we're going to put an inner text, which is basically text inside of the div, and we're gonna it takes on the variable I plus 1. So it's going to print out string wise. It's going to print out, because remember plus is going to be a concatenation in this instance and not an actual addition. So no, I'm sorry. No, it's in parentheses. It will add it. I'm sorry. So in this instance, 0 plus 1 is 1, and so forth. And it's going to keep incrementing as as we're iterating through. Container.div in this appends a child, as we learned before, and it does something else. And it adds class name grid item to each div. And then once we iterate through all the way through the i's, and I is no longer less than rows times columns, it breaks out of the for loop. And it does that because we only want make rows, and we call it right here make rows 1616 because we only want, what is that, 257 or whatever, that many divs, and we want it to stop, and that will be the 16 by 16. We don't want it to go infinitely longer, so that's why that's set there. And then this is what, just to have it in there, this is my old code, and I just commented it out, so I'll probably clean it up and delete it later. But and then I put this label in here for my own needs, really. So this says that labels the square, remove when not needed. I put that in there as a reminder to go back and delete this because I feel like I am not going to need or want labels because it's going to get in the way. Sorry, I can't talk tonight. It's going to get in the way of Etch-a-Sketch working properly when it's in there. And so you'll see what I'm talking about. So if we go out to Etch-a-Sketch, I won't refresh it because there's so many grid items and there's so many divs going on here. The browser, sometimes the tab crashes on me. So when I have DevTools up, so here it is in action. So this is what it does. So you got your grid item in your class, and I'm sorry I can't really blow this up. So hopefully you guys can zoom in, or I mean I guess I can a little bit, but there's a lot going on here. It's hard to zoom in and still be able to be organized. So here's your grid item. There's a class, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see it does add. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3. So it's iterating all the way to 256, which that number doesn't really mean anything. That's why I said I'm probably going to delete this, for the simple fact that I don't need these numbers here, and in fact it's probably going to get in the way on the next section, or when I build this out more. So that .inner HTML is what prints this out. So if I delete that line, it'll get rid of this. So just for your viewing pleasure, I will zoom in on this so you can see the grid items being applied to CSS correctly, and that's done through the CSS. And these divs are coming into existence via the DOM manipulation from the JS. Excuse me. And it just goes on and on and on and on until it gets down, and it'll truncate it. It says show all 257 nodes. So that's essentially it. And then down here, if you guys remember, I had my 3 console.logs. So this is what the set property does. Console.log is amazing, by the way. If you don't use it enough, use it more. You can never get enough of it. It's a great learning tool. So what that line does, the set property, these two right here, the set property, grid row, and grid column. So what it's doing is it's going into each div, and it's adding in the style grid rows 16 and grid column 16. And these, if you remember, not sure what happened there. Oh, I expanded it. Ooh, that was a bad idea. Anyway, oh, there's a lot of information in there. Please collapse. Thank you. Okay. So what this does is it adds in, these are the variables, the 16, 16. So it's saying, hey, I want to create 16 grid rows and 16 grid columns, and then the console.log was for row and column, so I can make sure that it was inputting the correct input from the function call, and it is 16 and 16. So that is, in a nutshell, is what we've got going on here. So that successfully completes this first part of Etch-a-Sketch, all the way down to number 3 here. And so next video we'll be working on hover and getting it to do cool things when we hover the mouse over it. We talked about hover a bit in one of the CSS exercises a long time ago. So I have to brush up my knowledge on that and probably do some Googling on it as well. But yeah, so not too bad so far. So there's different ways to do it, as I said, and I use the CSS Grid version. And so I hope you learned a little bit with me along the way and learned a little bit about Grid. I know I knew nothing about Grid, and I still know very little, but it was good getting that initial exposure because we've done everything basically with Flexbox and inline block so far. We've not used float or clear as well. I didn't even look into that using that, so I'm not sure what that's all about. But let me know in the comments how you guys are doing. Please like, share, and subscribe for more content. And without further ado, until next time, see ya.